Car crash cases, defective products, dangerous drugs, injuries, and abuse. Across the state of Alabama, the attorneys, proudly sponsored by the law firm of Hollis Wright, are here to serve you. Your tough legal questions answered by our experts. The attorneys with Josh Wright from the law firm of Hollis Wright and host David Lamb.
Hello and welcome into the attorneys. Thank you so much for spending your Sunday evening with us. For the next half hour, we have a couple of experts ready to talk about a subject that we think will matter to you. And what we try to do is make it easy for you to join the conversation, make it interactive. You can call, text, email. That information you'll see at the bottom of the screen. And also remember, as always, every time the attorneys is on the air, there is an attorney standing by live to take your call. It doesn't even have to be about the subject matter tonight, but they would love to speak with you. Leading our conversation, as he often does, from the firm of Hollis Wright. Josh Wright, good to see you, sir.
You too. I hope you're doing well.
Doing well.
Hope you had a good week.
I did.
Everything good? Well,
it's all good.
We're going to be talking about a topic tonight that we all hope doesn't end up in our lap in our personal lives, but it's divorce and child custody. This is a costly and kind of stressful time frame in a lot of people's lives. We're going to be talking about the fact that there is some light at the end of the tunnel, and the light is having the right people in play to help lead, guide, and direct you through that process. Candy Peeples with Peeples and Davis here in town does an incredible job. She's been on the show before. We decided to bring her back because she does such a good job, and she's somebody that we send these cases to in circumstances where we may be handling a case over here where that issue comes up. We send them to someone like Candy. And so Candy, thank you again for being on
to
discuss this issue. And I know, and we've talked about this before, you know, you see people a lot of times at kind of their worst moments.
Sure.
And that's a stressful process for them and for you, but the goal really is to kind of lead, guide, and direct people through the process, because there is some light at the end of the tunnel, is there not?
Absolutely. And having done this sort of work for as long as I have, I've realized that it is really, for many people, the absolute worst time in their life when you're dealing with their spouse and their children and their homes and their retirement and everything that they've worked for. So I think it's real important to have someone who can sort of see through that and understand that people just need the help, and people need help getting through the process.
How did you get into this area of work? Because, you know, as you well know in the legal world, this really is a specialty. There are not a lot of lawyers
Sure.
that do just this type of work.
Well, you know, I have to say that when I was in law school, I knew I wanted to do litigation type work. I liked trial work, I liked speaking, I liked working with a client. And I didn't know exactly what type of work I wanted to do, but I started doing this when I was in law school. I got a job in law school working at a firm doing this type of work, and I realized real quickly that I really had a passion for helping people. Although my parents have been married for 40 years, I have a tremendous amount of respect for marriage. I also understand that for some people, it may not be their choice, and the process and the reasons and the whys may not be what they are choosing, but it's the facts and the position that they're in, and I've really had a passion for helping people.
Well, that's great, and you've got the personality to be able to do that stuff. Let's kind of jump into it a little bit. I know we get a lot of questions when somebody's going through this, and they'll ask us, even though we're not the experts, so we try and get them to folks like you. But general questions are things like, you know, if I get divorced, you know, do I have to split every marital asset or everything that we've acquired together 50-50? Is that the way it works, or is it changed depending on circumstances?
It definitely changes. Alabama uses a process called equitable distribution, and what that means is that the assets and liabilities of the family are divided by the court in a way that's equitable or fair. It doesn't necessarily mean equal, but for many people, we start out with that premise in looking at assets that were acquired during the marriage. The equity portion allows the court some latitude and discretion if there are things like items received by inheritance or items received by gift, or many other assets that would be inequitable or unfair maybe to be divided equally. So the court has some ability to look at where it came from, if you will, and how it was acquired to determine how it's divided.
Talk to me just for a second about assets that somebody had coming into the marriage. If they had stocks or an inheritance or something else, are those things once they come into the marriage, do they become part of the marriage if there's a dissolution?
Well, there's a couple things you have to look in play. Again, assuming there's no prenuptial agreement or premarital agreement that addresses that, because a lot of people choose to look at that if they come into a marriage with a substantial estate. But assuming there's no premarital agreement, equity is going to come into play again. If you bring those assets in and you use them for the common benefit of the marriage and you buy homes with them that you both live in, and however those assets are used, the court determines whether it's equitable or fair to divide those between the parties. If, however, they're kept separate, they're kept in a total different account in just your name, and they're not used for the common benefit of the marriage, the court has the ability to pull those out and leave them as separate property depending on how they're used.
We get some great questions called, texted, and emailed to us. A question we have here, we have a couple that have to do with custody. One is just kind of an overall, how does child custody work and how are those decisions made? And also a question here about joint custody. So maybe
Sure.
just kind of deal with the custody issues.
Absolutely. Alabama's the standard of review, or the way that the court determines custody, is the best interest standard. And I say that carefully because it's a real important word, I guess, or words that the court uses to look at it. It really is what's in the child's best interest. There are many, many, many factors that the court looks at in determining that. Now, we have a presumption in Alabama in every case that the court is supposed to consider joint custody in basically coming into the courtroom. The court is supposed to look at joint custody and see if that would be in the best interest of the parties. I think that over the years, since I first started practicing, even till now, joint custody is becoming a lot more prevalent with judges, specifically here in Jefferson County and Shelby County, which are my main two practice areas, in concentration. But custody is such a big word in the sense that you have many, many aspects, but the two primary aspects that I would say when you're asking questions about custody, the court has to determine the physical part and the legal part. There are actually two prongs underneath custody to look at where the child lives and who makes the decisions.
Right.
And so in terms of that, the eyeglass, if you will, of that best interest standard, the court determines where the child should live, whether that's an even or a 50-50 type scenario, or one where one parent or the other might have primary residence. And then the second prong, as I mentioned, the legal side of it, is who makes those decisions? Who decides what orthodontist the child go to? Who decides whether or not the child enters a gifted program or stays in a regular, academic track? That's another division of custody.
We need to go to
take a
commercial
break?
break. All right, when we come back, here's one of the things I want to talk about.
All right.
Is, and I think you answered a little bit of it, does joint custody necessarily mean that the child is going to live jointly with both parents? I want to talk about that.
Sure.
And in addition to that, just some kind of general issues that come up generally about the custodial circumstance and kind of who's in charge. I want
Right.
to talk about those things because I know there are issues that are addressed in every circumstance.
Great place to pick up. We'll do that whenever we get right back. As we head to break, a reminder, call, text, email. Would love to have you join our conversation and contribute. Also a reminder, attorneys standing by right now to speak with you. It's a unique opportunity. Take advantage of it. Just call that number that you see there on the screen and get your legal questions answered tonight. Stay tuned. More of The Attorneys coming right up.
I'm Josh Wright with the law firm of Hollis Wright, a personal injury law firm. Thank you for watching The Attorneys. Now, we hope you, a friend, or a loved one never needs legal counsel for a case. But if you do, the goal of the show is simple. Provide answers and legal counsel when you need it the most. Your call to the show is free, so if you have questions specific to the show or related to other accident or injury-related topics, you can call, email, or text us. Or you can also follow us on Facebook or Twitter, or simply contact us by going to hollis-wright.com and click on the Contact Us link. We know your time is valuable, so thank you for spending it with us watching The Attorneys.
Welcome back into the Attorneys. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. A reminder as we come back from break, as you see on the bottom of your screen, you see ways that you can call, text, email. That's how you become a part of the show and interact with us. We love hearing from you, so please take advantage of those opportunities to get in touch with the firm of Hollis Wright. Josh?
All right, so when we went to break, I wanted to talk a little bit about joint custody and whether or not that means that the child shares a home with each parent in equal time at each place. And if you will weave into this answer, when the child has the right to state an opinion as to what they want, because that's a question we get a lot.
Absolutely. The quick answer is no. Joint custody absolutely doesn't always mean equal time. The court can structure that in a myriad of different ways to provide a division of custodial time that could be equal or 50-50, or it could be expanded weekends. You know, I think the old, I guess, structure that we all have heard, you know, every other weekend or whatnot, courts are not always looking at that. They are definitely looking at maybe a Thursday to Monday or some other kind of, I guess, compilation of those days. That it doesn't always mean equal, doesn't have to mean equal. In terms of when a child gets to decide, in Alabama, we don't have that. I know I grew up in Georgia. I know a lot of other states do have a certain age where the child's opinion is determinative, meaning that when a child says, I want to live with mom or I want to live with dad, the court absolutely has to go by that. Here, we don't have that, but I think our process is still really effective because at any age, if a child, you know, if a parent wants the judge to hear from the child and the child does have an opinion, the court has the discretion based on their age and maturity and I guess the reasons for why they have an opinion to take that into consideration. One quick thing I did want to clarify too is that even with joint custody or sole custody, I think it's important for everyone to know that no matter what the custodial arrangement is, each parent by law in Alabama has full rights to academic, medical, other records. So the law protects parents in terms of even if you don't have custody, you can go get copies of their school records or their medical records or anything like that. Any parent can do
We
that.
have a question here that goes nicely with where we are, a situation where there is joint custody, but the ex wants to move out of state and they have joint custody. Can that ex do that?
Well, it's a little complicated because several years ago, the Alabama legislature passed a new statute. We call it the Relocation Act, but I think it has a much longer term. The Alabama Parent-Child Protection Act, I believe, is what it was called. But that particular law requires any parent who has an order from the court awarding custody to one or the other. If you're going to relocate, there are certain things you have to do to provide notice to the other party, and then the other party has the opportunity in a specified amount of days that they can file an objection. The presumption is that it's not in the best interest of the child to move, so I will say that you sort of start out with it's not in the best interest of the child to move. But again, I have several of these cases right now, and depending on the reason for the move and what accommodations can be made to allow the parents to maintain their relationship, I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying you have to really make sure it's for the right reasons.
For example, if somebody's transferred for job purposes, that's something the court takes into consideration. It sounds to me a lot like the court is really intimately involved in a lot of these decisions, whether it's custody, where the child's going to live, who has certain rights. Am I misassessing that, or is that pretty accurate?
Not at all. Not at all. The court is very involved, and that's why it's real important for people that have specific circumstances or maybe specialized needs to understand that going to court is somewhat of a last resort. And the only reason that I say that is because when we are able to talk through these many, many, many details that have to be taken into place and into account, people can have a lot of control over how these decisions are made, as opposed to if you go to court, you are taking this to a person who doesn't know as much about your life as you do and asking them to make some pretty big decisions about it.
Some of the questions super practical, but kind of right where folks are. Got a question here about can I change my name after the divorce? So I guess a woman that changed her name, can she change her name back? And another question just about alimony and what that is.
Okay, yes. Definitely you can change your name. It's a little easier if you do it during the divorce process, and it's super simple. You just talk to your lawyer. We'll include a small provision in the order that states that you are entitled to change your name back. Then basically all you have to do is take your final decree down to the state and to the probate court and get your name changed. It's a lot easier. If you forget to do that during the process, you can still go and fill out a name change application at the probate court and do that. It's a real simple process and no big deal. Alimony itself, it's another support component. So child support is meant to be the support of the child. Alimony is a support component for a dependent spouse. So generally, if you have a spouse that has a lower income or a lower, maybe an educational background, the court can look to alimony in terms of keeping that spouse in a lifestyle or an income range similar to what they had experienced during the marriage. Now, I will say that alimony is highly discretionary, and the point with that is that there are many factors that the court looks at. The ones I mentioned, maybe ability to earn or educational background, or just some of them. Length of the marriage, any issues with disability. There are lots of factors that the court looks at to determine, so it doesn't mean that everybody's going to get alimony. I just want to be clear about that. In fact, it's one that the court looks at pretty strongly to decide if it's even arranged.
I've heard there's a bright line test in Alabama from non-lawyers that if you're married 10 years, you're guaranteed alimony. That's not accurate, is it?
It's definitely not accurate. I will say there is a faint gray line, that just to say that 10 years is a number that when courts are looking at what would consider be a longer term marriage or a shorter term marriage, there is sort of a gray line to say that if you're less than 10, you might get I get alimony in less than 10-year marriages all the time, but also there's less than 10-year marriages where the court says, no, you guys are, for a myriad of reasons, not going to be an alimony case.
All right. And some other good questions we have. Haven't thought about this, but what if we change our minds? What if they're going through the proceeding and then hey, let's just work it out?
I would imagine that actually happens more than you think.
It really does. It really does. We have a 30-day mandatory waiting period in Alabama, which means when I file anyone's complaint for divorce, the court can't make a ruling on that, whether it's through settlement or obviously I wouldn't get a trial in 30 days, but we can't get people divorced for 30 days. So as to your point about what if you change your mind, whether it's within that 30 days or any time before a settlement or a trial, we can dismiss a case. And I do think that many times that some people need to get a divorce and there are reasons and it's not going to change. But for a lot of people, this is just a highly emotional time, and that I am okay dismissing any case in terms of if people change their mind and they want to work on their marriage. This is simple to do.
Another question that I sometimes will get is, how long do I have to wait to get remarried? Is there a bright line there?
There
or
is.
Okay.
Yeah, there is. We have a rule here in Alabama that you cannot remarry anyone except your former spouse for 60 days. And so if you want to get remarried, you need to wait 60 days, and that has to do with the appeal times to appeal the divorce order and the court wanting to make sure that that's all done so that you don't remarry and then get an appeal and whatnot.
Another question, do I have to go to court or can we settle out of court?
100% you can settle out of court.
Okay.
Yes, there's when we file a divorce case, the court generally sets a trial date, sometimes anywhere between 6 and 9 months after the initial filing is when we'll first get our court date, and you can absolutely settle any time before you get to trial.
I know we're about to go to break. When we get back, I want to talk about cost, the big C, cost, because that's something that people ask about a lot. We're going to talk about that and whether you can do these things on your own or if you need to go get someone like Candy. Let's talk about that when we come back.
We'll do that. We'll pick up the conversation right there. As we step aside, a reminder of how you can join the conversation. Call, text, email. Also, you can find the firm of Hollis Wright on social media. On Facebook, if you'll just search the term Hollis Wright, you'll find them there. And on Twitter, they are at Hollis_Wright. Great ways to kind of keep up on what's going on and some great helpful tips constantly there on the Facebook and the Twitter page as well. Stay tuned. More of The Attorneys coming right up.
I'm Tyler Vale with the law firm of Hollis Wright. As with any industry, it's important in the legal world to hire an attorney that is knowledgeable and has a track record of success. But with so many attorneys out there and so many different types of cases, how does someone decide the right lawyer to hire? In this week's Legal 411, we're answering the question, what should I consider in hiring an attorney? In-state versus out-of-state, big firm or little firm, recommendations from friends or family, the internet, the phone book, or TV. With so many choices and so much information, it can be an overwhelming task trying to make the right decision. To complicate things, choosing a lawyer is an important and sometimes life-affecting decision and should not be taken lightly. So how do you select an attorney? Do your research. Look the firm up on the internet. Ask friends and family whether they know or have any experience with a specific firm. If you know any local lawyers, ask them about the reputation of the firms you may be considering. Call a local law office and ask if they are handling cases like yours. There's a good chance they can help you. But if they can't, they can always refer you to someone they respect who handles your type of case. And remember, ask questions face to face. Ask about their experience in handling cases like yours. How often someone from their office will be available to you, and what you can expect during the process. Please remember, your call, email, or text to the attorneys is free. All of us at Hollis Wright want to help answer your questions on real issues you face. Remember, a competent lawyer will respond to every question you send in. That's our pledge and promise to you.
Welcome back into the attorneys, the final segment we're upon right now. So if you've had a question, maybe you've been sitting on it and thinking about it, now's the time to act. Just a few minutes remaining in the show. So call, text, email, that information there at the bottom of the screen. Josh?
All right, so divorces don't take just 30 days sometimes. Sometimes they last a very long time. And I've seen personally with friends of mine that go through this. It takes a long time. I know people want to move on at some point, and a lot of issues will come up around, can I date somebody? We've already basically decided this thing's over. We're in court right now trying to, resolve all the final issues. Do you advise somebody the ability to date or do you wait until after that final decree is completed?
I absolutely advise waiting until after the final decree is completed. From a legal standpoint, you are still married until there is a judge's signature on a final decree of divorce. And while some lawyers will tell you and explain to you that dating or having relationships with someone else, depending on when it happens, it has a varying degree of effect, it still can have some pretty dramatic effects, even on the case itself. But I always remind people about keep in mind your spouse is already in an emotional state generally with getting divorced at all, and so adding in another third party until it's over just is never a good idea, and it creates another emotionally charged setting for something that's already pretty bad.
I want to talk about costs. We kind of mentioned that before we went to break, but before we get there, I know we're not actually talking about child support in this show. But in general terms, child support is governed by a schedule, is it not?
Sure, it is. It's the Alabama legislature every few years, there's a child support committee that meets regularly, but every few years they reevaluate and look at our child support guidelines. And that really is simply a calculation. We have what's called an income share model in Alabama, which means the court, through the guidelines, looks at the income of both parties and takes that percentage, if you will, into consideration in coming up with the child support amount. I will mention that my firm has a child support app. If you go to the App Store, if you have an iPhone or it's just meant for the layperson, it's just a calculation. You can run your guidelines. Is it
still discretionary with the court? Meaning, if your guidelines say, okay, well, I'm supposed to give this amount, if there's some other issue like the reason for the divorce, those types of things, does the court have some discretion to get outside the guidelines and force somebody to pay more?
It's a little complicated because Yes, but it's in a real narrow set of circumstances. If you have a special needs child or if you have some sort of extreme medical condition, the court can deviate from those guidelines. Also, if you have maybe a real big travel expense, one parent has to drive a long way to visit with their child, the court can downwardly deviate to take that into consideration. But for the most part, I would say that the child support guidelines are pretty firm, and you can't pay less, but in a real narrow set of circumstances.
All right, talk about cost, kind of how this thing works. Do most lawyers that are on the divorce side, do they charge hourly? Is that the way it works? Is there a flat fee that one can charge? How does that work?
You know, we have the ability to do a lot of things. The only thing we can't do is we can't do any sort of contingent fee. So we can't basically have our fee based on what we're able to obtain for you. Most divorce lawyers that I'm aware of either charge hourly or will charge a flat fee, but I would say 90% charge hourly.
We're just about out of time, but I want to give both of you the opportunity, just a final thought for our viewers tonight. And Candy, we'll let you start, please.
Well, I think my final thought would be to just let people know that this is a very important time in your life, and I would encourage everyone that even if you have worked the details out with your spouse and you think you know how you want to resolve the case, once you've signed the papers and once you reach an agreement, it's real important. So have at least a consultation with a lawyer to make sure that what you've agreed to is in your best interest.
Well, you know, what I'd say is this. Get someone who knows what they're doing involved if this is an issue that you're facing in your life, and we hope, you know, as we often say, we hope you never go through this.
Right.
If you do, make sure you have counsel to kind of lead, guide, and direct you through it, and I think Candy's a great example of someone that can do that for you.
Well, we appreciate both of you being with us tonight. Really helpful conversation. Appreciate you being with us as well as we wrap things up. Again, how you can get in touch with the firm of Hollis Wright. Maybe you still have a question or you just thought of something. Write this information down. Call, text, or email the way you can get in touch with them, or you'll find them on social media, Facebook and Twitter as well. As always, we appreciate you being with us, and we'll see you next week right here on The Attorneys.
Thanks for watching The Attorneys, sponsored by Hollis Wright.